Next, on Imágenes, the role of the New Jersey Public Advocate. Saludos, welcome to Imágenes. I'm Miguel Perez. Those who need affordable housing, welfare recipients, prisoners, the mentally ill, juvenile delinquents, those are just some of the people whose civil and constitutional rights the state public advocate is in charge of defending, sometimes even against the will of even the governor who appointed her. That's the subject we'll be discussing today with State Public Advocate Zulima Farber, the controversial role of her position, the people who depend on her protection, and those who have suggested that her job should be eliminated. Welcome to the program. You are in a catch-22 situation very often. You are a member of the governor's cabinet, and yet sometimes you have to go against the cabinet's policies. How does that feel?
I am very comfortable with that position. I knew that before I took the job. I have been familiar with the Department of the Public Advocate for a very long time, and I knew that it was in the governor's cabinet, but independent of it. And I'm very comfortable with that position.
Let's talk about some of the times during your reign in office where you have had to oppose some of the policies of the Florio administration. One that immediately comes to mind is the welfare recipients and the policy and then the law signed by the governor punishing, in a sense, mothers who had welfare mothers who had an additional child, taking away some $64 a month from a mother who had an additional child once they were on welfare. Yes. You felt that this was not fair to the child.
You're right. While I agreed with most of the governor's proposal to reform welfare, and agreed in fact that the welfare system needed reforming, I disagreed with that particular provision of the governor's proposal and said so from the beginning. The governor understood my position and never called me on it. He knows that the public advocate is there sometimes to even go against the wishes of the governor.
What is the situation now where there is a lawsuit challenging that position, that law?
Yes.
Do you think that the law will be changed?
I don't know that the law will be changed. It may be changed as a result of court action. Perhaps since the governor-elect, Mrs. Whitman, expressed during the campaign some disagreement with what the governor had done, maybe there will be some changes, but my recollection is that she agreed with that particular provision.
Yes, she did.
So I don't think that that particular provision will be changed as a result of the new administration coming in, but it may be changed by the court action, which is now pending.
There are other issues regarding welfare recipients. One of them that is being debated now, and I want to know your position on that one, is whether mothers should be forced to divulge the name of the father of this child.
I understand that that is already a requirement.
By the federal government?
By the federal government. Most of the funds for welfare comes from the federal government. Some of it comes from the state. And my understanding is that it is already a requirement of the federal regulations that parents on welfare divulge the name of the other parent. It usually falls on mothers who have to divulge the names of the father. And
so what is the state trying to do now?
Increase the loss of benefits. In accordance with the federal regulations, if the mother does not want to divulge the name of the father, she would lose 20%, I believe, of the benefits. What the governor has proposed is that a complete loss of all benefits if there is no divulging of the name. So that's the difference.
You have also had some differences with the Florio administration regarding juvenile delinquents, specifically those who are involved in carjackings, and whether they should get a break, or at least their time, let me see if I recall this correctly, their time in prison should be counted toward their ultimate sentence.
Yeah. My disagreement with the administration in that regard had to do with what I believe was constitutionally mandated, is constitutionally mandated, and that is that people who are similarly situated with regard to their background and so on, and who commit similar crimes, not be treated differently. And what the legislature passed and the governor signed was a law that contained a provision that said if a juvenile was incarcerated awaiting trial, because the judge decided that that he could not go home. The juveniles don't have bail. They don't have the equivalent of bail. So the decision at the point of charge is either in or out, incarcerated or out, back to the family. And if a judge decides that a juvenile should be incarcerated awaiting trial, then that time that the juvenile spent awaiting trial in jail would not be counted once he was sentenced. So that if a juvenile, two juveniles were convicted of the same offense, carjacking, and one received, let's say, the mandatory sentence of 60 days or 90 days, but he had already spent 90 days in jail. The juvenile who already spent 90 days in jail would spend another 90 days in jail. The juvenile who was home, I believe that that's unconstitutional. That is making a difference between two people similarly situated, which has no basis in the law or in fact. It's not a rational distinction between the two. And my opposition was that I thought that the law should provide for credit for time served.
What are some of the other issues that you have deferred from the cabinet and from the Florida administration? And first of all, and we're going to get into that, I know that you have been very supportive of the Democratic Party and, of course, of Governor Florio.
Absolutely.
You were out there campaigning in the Hispanic community for the governor very actively.
I was campaigning in the Hispanic community, in the black community, among lawyers, among women. I was everywhere.
But I think one of the things that gave you even more credibility, if I may say so, is the fact that sometimes you disagreed with him and said it publicly. Yeah. Tell me about some of those other issues.
One other area, and it was related to the issue we just discussed with regard to the changes in the juvenile law, had to do with mandatory sentencing. I was vocal even before I became the public advocate on the issue of mandatory sentencing. I do not believe that they work. I think that they have worked to the detriment of taxpayers because they have increased enormously the prison population in New Jersey, the number of inmates, and consequently the cost of corrections, the Department of Corrections. And I have been very active and very vocal in expressing my belief that mandatory sentences do not work and that we have to resort to something else to deal with crime in New Jersey. And
what is that something else? What is the solution?
Well, I believe that other sanctions, intermediate sanctions, it's what's needed. If you look at the statistics about who gets sentenced and who is serving time in the New Jersey prisons now, an overwhelming majority of those people are there because of drug charges or have a drug dependency, even if they have been sentenced for some other type of crime, not a drug offense. And it seems to me that we do the public little service if we simply warehouse those people, do not treat their drug dependency, and then let them out, as over 90% of state prison inmates eventually are paroled. They eventually serve the sentence and come back into the community. And it seems to me that we ought to be spending a lot more effort, a lot more money into drug treatment to really have some impact on the crime rate in New Jersey, because simply warehousing them has not worked.
Before we go on with this interview, I want to ask you about your own future as an attorney and as a public advocate, or what happens with the Whitman administration. But before we do all of that, we want to take a look at this tape that illustrates how you're speaking about some of these issues publicly and how some people are reacting to what you're saying. Let's look at the tape.
We frequently disagree, but she always disagrees intelligently and with charm and grace. She's a very tough adversary. We frequently agree, too, but she's a very fine lady and a very fine public servant.
We have not become so politically active that drug treatment is an issue to be debated at election time. What we see is elected officials who don't have the backbone to say, this is what we need, and this is where we're going to put it, and yes, we're going to put it in suburbia, and if it costs me my election, so be it, because it is the right thing to do.
I've known Zulima for a long time. Zulima and I went to law school together, and I can say she really hasn't changed that much. She's a dedicated, good lawyer. She's a tough lady. runs a very tight ship.
In fact, we brought a lawsuit recently against Seaside Park, which was and is discriminating against daily visitors. What they did was they have about 32 blocks of seashore in Seaside Park, and they were segregating the beach so that only about 6 blocks were dedicated to daily visitors. If you buy a pass for the day, a ticket for the day to go to the beach, then you were confined to about 6 blocks of the beach. And as you can imagine, that beach is crowded.
Zulima Farber has been a magnificent public advocate and the public defender for the state of New Jersey.
I was born and raised in Cuba, in the second largest town in the island, Santiago, Cuba. And I came to this country a couple of years after Castro took over, 1961. And I came as a result of the communist policies instituted by Castro. My family was practically thrown out of the island after my younger brother was jailed. He was 13 years old at the time.
She certainly is a role model for young Latina women, and particularly for young women like me who are aspiring lawyers. It was just so refreshing, so nice to have found out that she is a living legend in New Jersey. She is the first Latina to have graduated from a law school in New Jersey, and she has been documented as the first Latina lawyer in New Jersey. And I'm just so happy and so glad to know that she has made a great contribution to the state as the first Latina public advocate also.
I believe in education. I believe in helping others achieve what their potential allows them to achieve. And that's how I made it here. And I know that I now owe a debt, which I am perfectly willing and honored to pay back by helping others achieve their full potential.
Those are great reviews you got from some of the people that were listening to some of your speeches.
Nice to know.
And yes, and I'm wondering what is in store for you in the future. Will you consider at some time in the near future running for public office yourself?
I have never seen myself as a candidate for elective office. You know the old saying, don't never say never.
Right.
But I have never thought of myself in that position. I like government. I like public service. I have enjoyed those portions of my career that I have dedicated to government immensely, and I wouldn't rule that out. In fact, I would welcome continued public service in the future. Right now, I'm looking at returning to private practice at the end of this administration.
And that was my next question. What happens at the end of this administration? Would you, as a public defender, you're appointed to, and you can stay if you chose to stay as public defender.
Yes.
You could do that.
Yes.
For several more years.
Yes, I have a
Will
5-year
you be
term.
doing that?
I don't believe so. Although you're right that the public defender has a 5-year term, and I think I have another 3.5 years to serve in that capacity. Historically, the public defender has served almost the exact time as the public advocate, and it has been the same person since the beginning. I think with the exception of a very short period of time when Stanley Van Ness was the public defender and Judge Joe Rodriguez, who was the first Hispanic to serve on the governor's cabinet, was the public advocate. With that exception of just a few months, the public defender and the public advocate have been the same person and have served the same term, and I intend to go along with that tradition.
Now, the Whitman administration differed with the Flory administration on several issues that concern your office. And also Republicans had some things to say about the role of the public advocate. What do you think will happen if those Republicans are close to Whitman and convince her to eliminate, like some of them suggested? I understand that one of them is even on her transition team. Some Republicans in the state legislature suggested that your office should be eliminated altogether. Do you think that will happen? Would that be something that we should be concerned about?
Definitely is something we should be concerned about. It was something that I was always concerned about when it was time to appear before the budget committee of the legislature. However, I think that the public should understand that eliminating the Department of the Public Advocate is not a savings. The services that the department provides are either constitutionally or statutorily mandated. And let me explain that. The public defender part of the department is 93% of the budget and 93% of the staff.
Of the public advocate staff and
Of
budget.
the public advocate staff and budget, the whole department. You cannot prosecute people criminally if you do not provide a defense for those people who are indigent. The public defender represents 85% on the average, 85% of all persons charged with criminal offenses in the state of New Jersey. The whole criminal justice system would come to a halt if the public defender didn't exist. If it didn't exist statewide, then the counties would have to provide those services. Since day one in New Jersey, it has existed as a statewide centralized public defender system. So doing away with the department means you still have to provide the service. You would have to put it someplace. It would either become in but not of another state agency, another state department, or the responsibility would fall to the counties to pay for the public defenders. So that the services would have to be provided. It would not be a savings. The remaining portion of the department, the Division of Advocacy for the Developmentally Disabled, the Division of Mental Health Advocacy, and the Alternate Dispute Resolution, the Office of Alternate Dispute Resolution. Those divisions are, for the most part, funded with federal grants. So it is a very small portion of the department's budget and an infinitesimal portion of the state budget. We're talking about $6 or $7 million out of a $15 billion budget of the state.
Most of which is for public defenders.
Most of which is for public, well, no, the budget of the department is it's over 50 million, but of that, only about 6 or 7% is for these civil portions that are not constitutionally mandated, except for mental health advocacy. People cannot be institutionalized for mental illness unless they're represented by an attorney. So even they, have a constitutional mandate to provide that service. So my point is that we're really talking about peanuts. If you say we're going to do away with the department and provide only those services that the Constitution mandates or that the law mandates. For example, we have to provide certain services for the developmentally disabled because that is a division that enforces in New Jersey the Americans with Disabilities Act. There would be very little, if any, savings to do away with the department because the services would have to be provided as part of some other department. So for that reason, and that was a debate that I had with the Budget Committee back in March when I appeared before that committee to defend my budget request, and that I had more directly with Assemblyman Kamen, who is a member of the Transition Committee for my department. And we had that discussion, and they funded the department in fiscal 94. So I am optimistic that the new administration will understand that the economic consequences will be minimal to the budget and that the programmatic consequences and the legal consequences to the entire systems would be such that the department cannot be done away with.
And how optimistic are you that the women administration will have the same considerations for the Hispanic community as far as appointing Latinos to state government positions?
I take Mrs. Whitman at her word that she intends to have a government that represents New Jersey and New Jersey's population. And since Hispanics are part of that population,
10%.
I take her at her word, 10% of that population. I take her at her word that there will be representation of Hispanics on her cabinet and at every level. And I wish her the best in that endeavor.
Your position has been occupied by two Hispanics, you yourself and Mr. Caraballo before you.
Yes, and Judge Rodriguez even before
him.
That.
That's right.
During the Kane administration.
So this public advocate's position has, can we say, traditionally gone to a Hispanic. Does that mean that a Hispanic should be appointed to that position, or does it matter where we get appointed as long as we get an adequate number of jobs in the administration?
The department has always been headed by a minority, either a Hispanic or a Black American. I think that the public has begun to look at the department as the minority department in the cabinet, although other minorities have served in other positions. I don't see it that way. I think that the representation should be there in whatever capacity Mrs. Whitman finds a qualified person that is in tune with her beliefs and her philosophy. And that could be anywhere from the Attorney General to the Treasurer to any department in state government. And I think that we find in the Hispanic community people who are qualified in all walks of life. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Hispanic representation were in departments other than the public advocate.
She has 2 Hispanic members on the transition team right now. Mr. Sosa, who is still a state assembly member,
Yes.
will no longer be a state assembly member very soon. What happens with that transition team? Are you optimistic that they will consider Hispanics for important jobs? You were campaigning for Florio
Yes.
during the whole election year, and you were very optimistic that Florio was the right answer for the Hispanic community. Are you hopeful that Whitman will also consider our community better than it has been in the past? We are, Latinos, less than 1% of the state employees
Yes.
when we have 10% of the population.
Yes, I am hopeful, and as I said, I take her at her word that she will do that, and we'll wait and see.
We'll keep a scorecard.
We'll keep a scorecard.
Let's talk about Zulima Farber, the person, the Cuban young woman who came from Havana or from Santiago
Yes.
in 1961. I understand that you had a brother who was jailed in Cuba, and
Yes.
that was one of the more reasons that motivated you to come to this country.
That was the motivating reason why my parents decided that we all had to leave the country. My brother was 13 years old when he was jailed by the Castro regime for passing out literature against Castro. And after that, after they returned it home, the orders were that they didn't want to see him in the streets. So there was no other choice but to send him out of the country. And my parents saw the handwriting on the wall and couldn't see how the rest of the kids wouldn't get into the same type of trouble, so we all got sent to the United States.
Governor Florio, I saw you at a reception where Governor Florio announced a committee, since we're talking about
Yes.
the Cuban issue,
Yes.
a committee of Cuban Americans that he appointed to help the Department of Commerce
Yes.
to assess how the state of New Jersey would deal with a free and independent Cuba once Castro falls. Do you think Whitman will maintain that committee? And most of them were Democrats, or will she replace them with some Republicans, or what will happen to that committee?
Actually, there is bipartisan representation on that committee, and the committee has Hispanics who are not Cubans. There was quite an effort made to have bipartisan representation and wide Hispanic representation on the task force. It's called the Free Cuba Task Force.
Right.
And I know that Barbara McConnell, the outgoing Commissioner of Commerce, has made a recommendation to the incoming administration to continue that task force. And I know that Ozzie Cano, who is the chairman of the task force, has made a request of the Whitman administration to continue the task force until it files its final report, which is due in April of 1994. So I am hopeful that it will continue.
Great. Let's go back to the Public Advocate's Office and the role that you have in defending the rights of prisoners, especially
Yes.
minority prisoners.
Yes.
You've been very active and very involved and very vocal on this issue. Tell us about it.
Within the Office of the Public Defender, there is an Office of Inmate Advocacy. It is the office which, by statute, is charged with the responsibility of being the watchdog for the conditions of New Jersey's prisons and jails. We do not represent individual inmates in complaints that they may have about their individual treatment. What we look for is the overall condition of the jail. The Constitution mandates that the jails maintain a certain minimum standard, that they provide a safe place for inmates, that they provide hygiene and health care and recreation and certain minimum things that have to be provided to human beings. And that is the charge of the Office of Inmate Advocacy, to make sure that the jails and prisons are maintaining those minimum standards that the Constitution calls for. I think it is a very important function of government, and it is even more important when we are facing the situation that we're facing in New Jersey, which is extreme overcrowding of the prisons and the jails. It serves as a safety valve, so to speak, to prevent the loss of life, the injury to persons, and the injury to property that sometimes result from terrible conditions and inhumane conditions in jail. And so I view that as a very important function of government. When I came into office in August of 1992, I found that prior budget cuts had decimated the staff of that office, and there were 3 attorneys left in that office and no support staff, no investigators, no secretaries. And I was able, with the help of Governor Florio, to increase the staff. By the way, by December of 1992, all of those 3 attorneys were gone. And so I was able to be exempted from the hiring freeze and hire 3 attorneys, 4 investigators, and 3 clerical staff, and also to form a partnership with Seton Hall Law School, for which I am very grateful to Dean Riccio, because he saw the wisdom of doing this. And we have now one of the attorneys from the Office of Inmate Advocacy is also an adjunct professor at the law school. She resides at the law school, and there are 6 law students in a clinic dealing with the cases that we bring to maintain the minimum standards in the prisons and the jails.
There are so many other issues that we could discuss, housing, for example,
Yes.
and there's an issue right now. We have 1 minute left, so I have to say goodbye, but there is an issue that I wanted you to talk about briefly in Morris County, where
Yes.
there's a conflict between prisons and
Yes.
housing. Tell us about that just briefly.
The Department of the Public Advocate represented the NAACP and the Fair Housing Council to force the township of Morristown to build more affordable housing. And as a result of a settlement of that case, there was a specific area that was designated for the building of 70 units of low-income housing. It turns out that the units have not yet been built, and the county now wants to use that site to build a new jail. And so there is this rift going on between public housing and the need to build a new jail.
We'll have to keep up with that issue in another program. Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure. We wish you good luck in whatever it is that you decide to do with your career, and I know that it will be successful.
Thank you.
Many Latinos are very proud of you.
Thank you
for
very
what you've done. I'm Miguel Perez, and I hope to see you next week on another edition of Images, Imágenes. Hasta pronto.